So during the Vietnam War, Agent Orange was used as a defoliant sprayed by the US military to destroy jungle cover used by the North Vietnamese forces to hide their movements. Between 1962 and 1971, over 19 million gallons were deployed, with a site named Bien Hoa serving as a primary storage and handling site in Vietnam. Now, the dioxin in Agent Orange is a highly toxic compound. It persists in soil and water and causes severe health issues like cancer, neurological disorders, and birth defects, and it actually can be generational. Some of you may know of Agent Orange due to efforts to get veterans exposed to it, care, and compensation. Now, post-war, Vietnam identified Bien Hoa as its largest dioxin hotspot with nearly 500,000 cubic meters of contaminated soil requiring remediation. Now, side note, dioxin is what Russia used to poison Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko back in 2004. Now, the US initially resisted acknowledging responsibility for the effects of Agent Orange, both for the Vietnamese civilians and its own veterans. However, since the mid 2000s, starting with President George W. Bush, US policy shifted towards reconciliation. This included funding cleanup efforts and disability assistance as part of a broader effort to mend ties with Vietnam, who was a former enemy that turned into a pretty strategic ally in the effort to counter China's influence. Now, by 2019, the US committed over $430 million to the Bien Hoa cleanup and started a 10-year project in collaboration with Vietnam's Ministry of Defense. It's managed through the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Now, the Bien Hoa project is a massive undertaking. The plan involves excavating contaminated soil, enough to fill 40,000 dump trucks, and either encasing it underground or thermally treating it with a furnace to neutralize the dioxin. This work is dangerous, requiring workers in protective gear to operate in extreme heat with regular blood tests to monitor dioxin exposure. The timing is critical here. Excavation is concentrated in the dry season, which runs from December to April. They do this to avoid monsoon rains that could spread contamination. During that time, they lock down the site and secure it so that it is not spreading contaminated soils. And by early 2025, the project was about halfway complete, which is a testament to years of US-Vietnam cooperation in this site. However, in January of 2025, shortly after Trump's inauguration, his administration began dismantling USAID, which oversees the Bien Hoa funding. An executive order froze foreign aid, stopping payments to cleanup contractors. On February 14th, U.S. diplomats in Vietnam warned of an impending catastrophe as the rainy season loomed, with open pits of toxic soil covered only by tarps. The suspension left workers unpaid, with some quitting and some continuing their work out of the kindness of their hearts. And the site is quite vulnerable to flooding, which could poison the nearby communities and the Saigon River, which could affect Ho Chi Minh City that has 9 million residents. The Trump administration's actions were chaotic. Contracts were canceled on February 26th, then reinstated a week later, but payments remained unpaid as of mid-March. Rubio boasted of cutting 83% of USAID programs, framing it as aligning with Trump's agenda. This whiplash left contractors scrambling at their own expense, with a reduced workforce racing against the weather. The stakes here are quite dire. There are millions of people in Ho Chi Minh that could be affected, not to mention the hundreds of thousands that live near Bien Hoa, some just yards from contamination. Dioxin has already spread over the decades via wind and water, tainting food chains. A flood could amplify this, pushing toxins into major river systems. Experts are calling Trump's halt on aid mid-cleanup an environmental crime, worse than doing nothing, because at least then they hadn't disturbed the soil. But now the disturbed soil is exposed without containment. Abandoning Bien Hoa could undo decades of trust building with Vietnam, handing a propaganda win to rivals like China. It also raises questions about U.S. reliability globally, especially on issues tied to its own historical actions. For Vietnam, it's a reminder of lingering war scars, both literal and diplomatic. Vietnam's relationship with the U.S. has evolved dramatically since the war. Today, it's a key partner in counting China's influence in the South China Sea, while $160 billion in annual trade and joint military efforts, including searches for the remains of U.S. soldiers, continue. The Agent Orange cleanup has been a cornerstone of this partnership, symbolizing U.S. accountability and goodwill. Halting it risks not just environmental disaster, but also diplomatic fallout with a nation of 100 million people that is a strategically vital ally in Asia. The Bien Hoa crisis is more than a funding dispute. It's an overlap of environmental urgency, geopolitical strategy, and the unresolved legacy of the Vietnam War, exacerbated by an administration's abrupt policy shift. With rainy season approaching, the clock is ticking, and without this aid, these people who live in a strategically critical nation to the United States will die.